As we develop into adults, we also develop lots of inhibitions, and we have to learn how to be playful again, which, well, I don't know about you, but I found it really, really difficult. And I certainly found it difficult when I was learning to paint. I always had somebody wanting to see what I'd been doing, which made me even more inhibited, and I found it really difficult. So in this video, I'd like to show you how to practice, how to be a little bit playful, but we're going to try and practice with a purpose, without any kind of pressure. And through that practice, we're going to build a knowledge of pastels, a resource that we can then use to develop pastel paintings at a later date. When we buy pastels, whether we buy them singly or in boxes, they come with bits of paper around them. The first thing you need to do is get rid of that piece of paper. It's a bit like a security blanket, but you've got to get rid of it. However, a good tip with some manufacturers, if you just bend your pastel ever so slightly in the middle, you'll be able to pull out half of the pastel. Gives you a nice uncovered stick with which to work, and then the other half stays in its paper wrapper so that you can identify the colour at a later date. It's quite useful, that. So what we'll do now is start straight away with making marks with pastel, building up your repertoire. And a pastel has a tip and a side. Believe it or not, we're going to work with the side shortly, but we're going to begin with using the tip in exactly the way that you used a crayon when you were at school. With the tip of the pastel, you can make single lines, which if you press hard, those lines will be quite deliberate. And if you press very gently, you see how fine the lines are and subtle. Lines like this can develop into areas of colour. The closer the lines become, they're called cross-hatching. So when you cross one colour with another in this way, using the point of the pastel the whole time, you're developing areas of colour. The colour of the paper shows through slightly, but the closer together your marks are, the less of the paper colour will show. You can use an alternative colour and carry on working over the top so that your area of colour becomes more interesting. Your lines can curve. It still can be called cross-hatching. Let's try a third colour over the top of that. I'm pressing quite firmly here so that the colour is building up quite densely. There's a technique called feathering. That's also using the edge of the pastel but making little single marks like this, building up areas of colour where the strokes are very close together. You can also use other colours over the top. And so long as all your marks are going in the same direction, that's feathering. You can do it vertically too. And build other colours in if you want to create a more interesting multicoloured area. When you go to the shop to buy pastels, you'll find that they come in lots of different tones. They're graded from light through to dark in each colour that you buy. And that's one of the lovely things about working with pastels. You don't have to mix with water to create the tones that you want. Here's a light blue. Here's a medium blue. We move gradually from light to medium. And you see how you can move subtly from one tone, a light tone, through to dark. If you want to create a shape or an edge that's nice and crisp, you can use another piece of paper, and with it you can create a shape by simply using that piece of paper to create a sort of mask for the shape. So when I take this away in a second, we should have, hopefully, a nice crisp V shape cut into the pastel. Finally, very nice, useful technique is one that I've called stippling. The Impressionist painters used to use pointillism as a technique, and that consisted of lots of little dots, still using the point of the pastel. The further apart the dots, the more the background colour of the paper shows through. But then you can make your dots very, very close together, and the closer together they are, the more you start to create areas of colour. Now we're going to look at another way of making marks and covering the paper, and this time, instead of using the point of the pastel, which is familiar, we're going to do something which is rather more unfamiliar, which is use the side of the pastel. Now when we press the side of the pastel to the paper, we can make sweeping side strokes. As you move the pastel across the paper, you can see that the texture of the paper shows through, and also if there are any bumps in the pastel, you'll get gaps in the marks that you make. I'll change to another colour, and again you can still see the blue of the paper shining through in places, but the side strokes cover the paper very quickly so that you can build up areas of colour in this way. If you press hard with the pastel, the marks that you make will be quite dense. Now I'm going to show you overlaying of colours. So if I use side strokes here, in the two colours that I used before, you'll see that I can take yet another colour, and using a fairly gentle touch, this is something that's terribly important to practice, you can sweep one colour over another and still see the underneath colour glowing through. Let's try a darker, redder tone here. This leads me to yet another interesting technique. Let's blow away some of the crumbs, which is blending. Now you can blend colours together with a finger like this, just gently stroking one colour, blending one colour into another, which creates a lovely soft effect, doesn't it? And when you use a finger, what you're doing is you're pushing the pastel particles into the paper. You can also use a Kleenex tissue or a piece of toilet tissue, but I think you can see from what I'm doing here that when you blend with a tissue, you're actually taking pastel off the paper and leaving yourself with just a film of colour. So perhaps using a finger may be a little more effective if you want to retain your colour area. Once you've done some blending like this, you can go back and lay yet more colour over the top. And blending again, so that you can adjust the colour and the tones in an area of pastel to give you quite a lot of subtle nuances as I've created in this area here.